Hello, my name is Honorable Dr. Stephanie Ganaway Pasley, and I'm here to talk about gun violence and mental illness. And I would love to speak on this topic to Congress in Washington because politicians and pundits often invoke mental illness as a cause for gun violence, particularly in the wake of a mass shooting. So the perception really radiates outward to the media as well as the public in our community. According to several polls based on research over the past few years, roughly half the American public believes that mental health problems are chiefly to blame for shooting. People simply believe that people have diagnoses, they're depressed, they have anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, which are some of the diagnoses and which contributes to decisions that are made in regards to mass shooting. Well, it is true that several mental illnesses does appear in some mass shootings, but to simply pin the blame on violence on mental health problems is just simply not true, and it's misguided. Many Americans live with mental illness. People live with schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, panic attack, PTSD, and do just well in regards to their treatment plan. Indeed, around 1 in 5 Americans, which could roughly be about 43 million Americans, have a diagnosed mental illness in a given year, and 1 in 25 Americans, which is about 9 to 10 million Americans, have a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia and bipolar. It is critical to understand that mental illness is not the cause of gun violence. The United States have similar rates of mental illness to other countries, but much higher rates of gun violence. The firearm homicide rate in the United States is nearly 25 times higher than other high income countries, and firearm suicide rate is nearly 10 times that of higher um, income. Hate is not a mental illness. I mean, how many more lives do we have to lose? How many more will be lost? How many more families and communities and must be traumatized until we act as a state or nation or country to implement sensible solutions that put a stop to these avoidable acts of terror. Violence has many contributing risk factors, and mental illness alone is very rarely the cause. There's a difference between mental illness and evil. There's a difference between mental illness and hatred. Only 4% of interpersonal violence in the United States is solely attributed to mental illness. People with mental illness are more likely to be victims of interpersonal violence than perpetrators of violence. Similarly, there's no single cause of suicide, or while mental illness, specifically depression or anxiety, is a risk factor for suicide, which is because guns are used a lot of times to commit suicide, more so to males than females. Not everyone who experiences suicide or dies by suicide has a mental illness. So blaming mental illness for gun violence only serves to further stigmatize and discriminate against people with mental health condition, who are more often the victims of violence than the cause of violence, and further distracts from the real issues at hand in addressing this national crisis. Gun violence prevention policies that focus solely on a mental health diagnosis will not stop gun violence. Instead, these policies fuel prejudice and fear around people living with a mental illness and could lead to people avoiding mental health services. So, Keep in mind that after mass shootings and other widely publicized shootings, people often blame mental illness as the cause of gun violence. It is common to read reports that describe the shooter as psychotic or mentally disturbed, but never have I seen a person just simply being described as being evil or hateful and pre-calculated and planned to carry out these acts based on hate, based on evil. So these shootings capture the public's attention and reinforce the harmful myth that mental illness causes violent behavior. Now, research consistently shows that the majority of people living with mental illness, including those with serious mental illness, are not violent toward others. In fact, people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of interpersonal violence than the perpetrators. So, again, I want to say that when we continue to blame mental illness on gun violence, only serves to further stigmatize and discriminate against people with mental health conditions who are more often the victims of violence than the cause of violence.